This is my pet jumping spider, Jack. Get it? Jumping Jack? Yeah, you get it. And this is where Jack lives, the Skull Garden, which I started building about three and a half months ago. Now, there are people on YouTube and Instagram, Reddit, who have made terrariums with an animal skull, or sometimes a whole skeleton. There are people who have made a terrarium with a bunch of fake animal skulls, including humans, because humans are animals. But I do not believe anyone has made a terrarium where the entire hardscape is real animal skulls, so I am quite confident in saying that this is a world first, and at the bare minimum, an internet first. If you can find one that has an earlier timestamp than February of this year, please let me know. As always, I'm going to walk you through how I made this design using only beginner techniques and plants so you can make it at home for as cheap as possible. Alright, so this is one of those Walmart 10 gallons, and we're gonna make it, pretty goth. Anyways, wouldn't be one of my videos without glare, my cat's acting like assholes, and my neighbors making noise. So, here we go. As always, first we clean the container, and then we add in some sterilized gravel for drainage, followed by a clear plastic sheet with a bunch of holes stabbed into it as an outlet for rage and as a substrate barrier. Now, I do need to say, this is not a care guide for this particular species of jumping spider. Generally speaking, a 10-gallon would be too large for most in captivity due to their inability to find food. However, I culture the fruit flies directly in the tank behind the cow jaw, and as I caught this in my garden, I have every intention of catching and re-releasing it if it ever looks like it's, having difficulty finding enough food. That has not been the case yet, and it's been in there for about a month. We are going to very vaguely follow some Iwagumi principles. The dynamic cow jaw is going to be at an angle to add some visual interest and take up the majority of our hardscape. The sheep skull, which I think is a sheep skull, I found it on a farm that I was trying to purchase. It's a quote-unquote support stone. Not going to bother with the Japanese names. Maybe I'll put them up later just for funsies. But essentially it supports. As we prepare for our first plant additions, let me explain what was done off camera. Obviously, I added more soil, particularly in the two corners. We also slope towards the back for depth. There is more soil on the left than the right, and that is due to the dictation of Mr. Amano's Iwagumi principles. If I could go back in time, I would have put in drastically more soil on each side, but the compost I make to add into our custom ABG mix kind of comes to a standstill in winter due to the sub-freezing temperatures. Now, as discussed, the angled cow jaw is our focal point. It is the largest piece and is angled to draw the eye along a diagonal line. It also sat outside for several years before coming into my possession, and subsequently sat outside in my possession for another 5 to 7 years. This creates a sun-bleached desaturation and weathering damage to the bone itself to give it a striking visual difference from the other skulls. This project has been in the works for quite a long time, after all. Next, we see that the coyote skull is also at an upward angle similar to that of the cow jaw. This allows our eyes to continue along a similar line and, well, hey, my blood pressure is acting up, so if you're listening to this, that means I didn't die. Additionally, the jaw is kept open for more visual dynamism. The cow is an herbivore, and the coyote a carnivore, with, sharp teeth. As stated, the sheep skull is our quote-unquote support stone for the cow jaw. I have no idea how old this skull is, as I found it buried under mulch at a farm that I was going to buy before I found out they were moonlighting as a hazardous waste dump. and then covered all the filth with mulch to hide it from prospective buyers. This skull is obviously older than the coyote skull and has some discoloration from the leaching of the mulch it was buried under. All three of our primary skulls have very distinct visual differences, adding in dynamism and interest. Retrospectively, the sheep skull is a bit too close to the glass in that, front left corner, which would later prove quite annoying when trying to trim and train moss in that corner. The sheep skull is facing the opposite direction of the cow jaw and coyote skull for visual tension. Next, we have 3 raccoon skulls of varying state. I found these under my cousin's house, so I presume them all to be related. The best specimen is up with the coyote skull in a opposite direction in a mirror of the cow jaw and sheep skull. Although facing the polar opposite direction for tension, it still follows the same line as the coyote skull, and the cranial hump for the brain pairs with the elevation caused by the coyote's mouth being open. Behind the cow jaw is our mid-grade raccoon skull. It is slightly smaller than the first one, helping facilitate the sense of depth and scale we create with the raised substrate. It is facing away, showing off the damage to the back rather than the teeth. It follows a sharper angled line to that of the sheep skull at a much more dynamic pitch to further highlight the sloped substrate and draw the eye to the corner rather than out of the enclosure. Moving on to the third raccoon skull, in the far back we have a skull that is damaged beyond recognition if I didn't know it was a raccoon. This allows us to continue the sense of depth and scale on that side, and this skull in time will be almost completely covered in plant growth. If we were truly following Iwagumi principles, it would be angled inward, but this is the world's first skullagumi, so I can do what I want. Lastly, up front we have a muskrat skull. Unfortunately, I did have to buy this one, and since normies like to appropriate goth culture, it was bleached in hydrogen peroxide. I absolutely loathe the look of super white bones, and it would stand out in quite a bad manner, so I dyed it in coffee. This small skull follows the same line as the back left raccoon skull, and is in direct contrast to the coyote skull, making a V shape for the viewer. From an overhead, the two lines form approximately a 100-degree angle. So this is how our quote-unquote stems in the back corner started. 3 varieties of fittonia, 2 small cuttings each. In retrospect, like I said, I should have put a lot more soil in that back corner, both for the visual and because it took them quite a long time to grow high enough to get over the cow jaw. But, as you'll see, it fills out really nicely when given time. Off camera, I added a bit of moss behind the main skulls in the back, and I used some of the less healthy moss for that. I actually used an entire moss culture on this build, so the springtails were already in the moss when I added it in. Now, let's speed run through this moss planting because it is 4 o'clock in the morning and it is much easier to hit fast forward rather than it is to make a bunch of cuts and edits on a video that only 4 people are going to watch. So now let's look at a top view so you all can see the spacing. And man, does that sheep's skull really pop when it's moist. We got some oak leaf creeping fig in one corner, the fittonia in the other, and then our thread moss. And it's about a 50% spread. I'm really liking it. So this is what it looked like after about 2 months. Took the moss about a month and a half to mostly carpet. At this stage, it had been trimmed 2 or 3 times. I don't fully remember. I don't know what that tall weed thing is. Just kind of hitchhiked in since the compost is outside. I did end up removing it. It grew all the way up to the lid and bent over, and it was really segmented-y. It didn't like it. The fittonia was interesting. You know, the red fittonia took off pretty well since it had more leaves. The pink and white fittonia were really kind of struggling. Obviously, I was able to get them to grow since you're seeing this video. But yeah, like I said, I would have wished that I put more substrate in that back corner so that they didn't have to grow as tall to get over the cow skull. The oak leaf creeping fig tends to take about a month to fully root. And as you can see by not seeing it, at this stage it still hadn't really grown all that much. Everything changed, of course, when I caught Jack in my garden committing war crimes. So here we are now. Jack's been living in here for about a month. This is about 3.5 months from when the gravel went in. As you can see, the fittonia has started to take off. And the oak leaf creeping fig, oh my god, it's going everywhere. Jack predominantly sleeps under the oak leaf creeping fig that's on the coyote skull. I don't know what those spindly hitchhiker plants are, but they're in a flowering stage, so I figured I may as well get the video out now. Jack explores the entire enclosure, has climbed up to the top, likes to hunt from the coyote skull, the cow skull, and the fittonia, also climbs up the spindly plants, and yeah, looks like they don't need to be kept in containers the size of bottles.